Hello everyone, it's Daryl. How you guys doing? Today I've got this, not really old, but a slightly older model Homelite chainsaw. It's a 42cc. Belongs to a friend of mine. It's never worked on one quite like this before, but it shouldn't be too bad. It won't start. It just kind of pops and won't start. I've already had a couple preliminary looks at it, and I've noticed that the carburetor is really bad. And if you take the air cleaner cover off here, there's two screws, one on either side here, and then this cover lifts off. Let's have a look. The air filter on it was really a mess. Now you can see how dirty and clogged up the air filter is, and when you lift it up, there's a lot of dirt beyond that that's gotten into the air intake horn here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the air cleaner box off, pull the carburetor apart, inspect the inner cylinder, make sure there's no damage. I hope there's not too much damage anyway from the dirt that may have been ingested into the cylinder. We're going to clean the carburetor. We're going to check, I think, if I remember right, the fuel filter was missing on it too, so the fuel line is just bobbing around in there. We're going to replace the fuel pickup stone on it. I got a new air filter for it. And there's also an isolation spring that's broke on the bottom here. This anti-vibration isolation spring is broke. We're going to replace that so the thing isn't like shaking around like crazy every time they're using it. That is, of course, assuming that it's still going to run after this. So let's remove these two screws here for the air cleaner and see how it goes. Alright, the screws are very long. They're size T15 Torx bit. Pull those out, and then the air cleaner intake just lifts right up, and then the whole carburetor here, there's a gasket on it. Make sure you put that down flat the way it goes, facing you, or however you want to remember it by. And the carburetor itself is going to pull right out now once we take the two fuel lines off and disconnect the choke linkage just by twisting it a little and popping it out. Alright, there's also a throttle linkage on the right side and a choke linkage on the left side. Both those just twist right out. The throttle linkage will stay in place down there attached to the trigger, and the choke hole assembly knob will come right out and just lay that aside. There's a gasket here stuck to the back side of the carburetor. We'll leave that in place. Got a little bit of dirt there in the impulse port. We're going to have to clean that out really good. The other thing is the broke off when I went to move it. This area right here in this fuel line was all rotted off, and that broke off down in the tank. I also purchased a foot of Homelite fuel line, and Homelites have their own special size fuel line. You have to specify it's for a Homelite when you get it, because the generic clear fuel lines that you buy just aren't the same size as the Homelite specific line. So, alright, we're going to show you a little trick on how to change that fuel line there, and we're going to clean this carburetor up and blow the intake port out, and we're going to have a look down in the body there and see if there's anything wrong with the cylinder while we're here. Before I get started taking apart the carburetor, I usually fire up my air compressor, and I'll use the blowgun to clean all the exterior dirt and debris off of it. Alright, look how much cleaner that is to start out with. You can see everything better, and you don't have to worry about getting that dirt in places where you don't want it to be. So, if you don't have access to an air compressor, a small soft bristle brush will work. Possibly even, the other thing I would do is dip it in a small bowl or container of fresh gasoline or solvent to clean it before you take it apart. Always a good idea to start with a clean carburetor. And whenever I'm working on a carburetor, I always start out with it on a nice clean cloth so I can keep my parts organized and together and not worry about being able to see things. The contrasting color helps to see things when you're doing the repair too. Another thing I like to use a lot of times is a magnetic parts bowl or tray that holds the parts firmly in place in the little tray so you don't have to worry about them falling out. I have two of them, but they're being currently used for some ongoing projects right now, and I don't want to take the time to empty them out, so we're just going to do this right now since this is going to be a very quick clean and repair. Not even a total rebuild. We're not going to change any of the diaphragms or anything right now unless we see something damaged inside when we get it apart. We're just going to clean it and put it back together. 4 Phillips screws will get us access to this bottom control panel over the main pump diaphragm. And once we get the screws out, we can just pop that off either with our fingernail or with a little screwdriver. And one seems to be stuck on there pretty tight. Let's get the screwdriver. And it really didn't take much force at all just to lift a corner up. And we'll lift that off. And there's our diaphragm. We want to make sure there's no tears in it. No stiffness. It should be very flexible and easy to move up and down. You should feel, when you press down on it just a little bit, you should feel it engaging the fuel metering arm underneath. And if we can get this off without tearing it, we're going to go ahead and take that off and clean underneath it too. And it's a little sticky, so we're not going to pull it all the way off, but we can look underneath it and show you how clean everything is under there. So I'm not worried about having to change anything or do anything under there. It's all nice and clean. The diaphragm itself is very supple and not brittle or cracked. And the fuel metering arm, the silver lever right here, in the center, that actually opens and closes to allow the fuel to flow into the carburetor, is right at the height where it needs to be too. What you do is you turn it sideways so you're looking across the top of the body, and the top and tip of that fuel metering arm right there should be even with or just a hair below the top of the carburetor body, and it's perfect right now. So this side's nice and clean. We're going to go ahead and put this back together. Next, we're going to remove the other side of the carburetor here, this back plate, and we're going to just take the two screws out and pop that off. And we'll have a look in there because there is an actual filter screen in there on the intake. And we're going to blow some carburetor cleaner through all these holes here to make sure they're all clean, and to make sure there's no debris in the main intake line from this decayed fuel line here. But the throttle, or the fuel filter itself, looks very clean on this. But we're still going to blow some carb cleaner through it just to be sure. Alright, that's all flushed out and clean. Everything looks nice and clean now on both sides. We're going to put this plate with the diaphragm back on. And when you put this on, the throttle arm here is going to push against the idle stop screw there. So you need to be careful putting it in place. And sometimes you'll need to hold the throttle arm over a little bit to get that plate to drop into place so it's lined up right. But there's two little guide pins in it, so once it's in, it'll stay in. You can let go of the throttle arm and reinstall your two screws. Alright, the next step is going to be replacing the fuel line. I'm having trouble focusing today. Let's turn that autofocus off. There we go. Next step is going to be replacing the fuel line. And to access it, we're going to have to go through here, because it pushes up through the top of the... Well, let's get a screwdriver and point to it here. It pushes up through the top of the carburetor. If I can follow that down. Right down here where the tip of my screwdriver is, there's a hole right there where it pushes through. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to pull the old one out and then reinstall a new one through there. So we need to get an idea of how long the fuel line needs to be before we get started. We're going to tip it up on its side, open the fuel tank, and now we're leaking fuel like crazy out one of the other holes. I probably should drain the fuel out of this, but what we're going to do is I'm going to reach in with this hook tool I have here, this T-handle with this long stiff wire attached to it. That's actually a power boost throttle rod from an old Jacobson Snowburst snow thrower, which was scrapped out years ago, and I took that rod off it because a friend of mine showed me that they make great pull rods. You use them to pull springs, fuel lines, things like that from hard to reach places. So we're going to stick that in a hole, and we're going to use that to pull out the broken fuel line and hopefully fuel filter if there is one in there. I'm not sure if there is one in there. And we're going to show you how to replace the fuel line. The fuel line that rotted away appears to be the return line. I fished around there and I found this line here that you can see in the tank sitting there. That appears to be the pickup line because it's the longest one that goes all the way to the bottom. We need to install a new fuel filter on that, which we're going to do right now. Boom, just like that. Now, it's not just a fuel filter. That also acts as a weight to keep the fuel line down at the bottom of the tank where it belongs, so it can actually suck up the fuel. Without that in there, that fuel line tends to float on top of the gas and suck in air, and that will cause your engine to run improperly. So it's critically important to make sure that fuel filter weight hasn't fallen off inside your tank. Because with the gas these days, all the ethanol in the gas and the way these lines decay and fall apart over time, it's definitely a possibility these things can come out. So now we're going to replace the short piece of fuel return line on top. We're going to put the cap back on, and this piece of fuel line is only about 2 inches long. It hooks to the carburetor, curves downward, and just goes into the top of the tank so that the excess fuel can flow back into the tank. So we're going to take our new fuel line and we're going to cut a piece off about 2 inches long. I'll show you how to insert that into the tank too. When you trim your fuel line, oops, there it is. When you trim your fuel line, cut it on an angle like that. Let's see if I can get it better. There we go. Cut it on an angle like that, and then apply a little oil or WD-40 to it, and it'll make it much easier to slip it down into the hole where it needs to go. Another tool that we have at our disposal is this fuel line puller. It's a piece of thin, stiff wire with a sharp pointed hook at the end, and you stick this into the tank, put it up through the hole you want to pull the line through, attach the rubber line to this end of it by pressing that tip through the actual rubber, and then just pull it right through. And these things work really great too. I got this on eBay for like $1. I highly recommend everybody have one of these in their toolkit too. We've returned the carburetor to its proper place, attached the choke lever, the fuel return line, the fuel supply line, what else? Oh, throttle rod, the air cleaner housing. And now we're cleaning the air cleaner housing out inside. We're going to install a new air filter, and we'll lightly oil that before we put it in, and then we'll reinstall the cover plate over the top. Let's check the primer now, make sure it's priming like it's supposed to. Look at that, a couple pushes on the primer bulb and the primer bulb fell apart. That's not cool. We're gonna need a new primer bulb. Alright, here we go. Look at that shiny new primer bulb there. $7 for that. You see it's got 2 expansion clips on the outside edge, and it pushes through this hole here and snaps into place. In order to remove it, you reach behind it with a pair of pliers or a couple screwdrivers, and you gently squeeze these 2 tabs together, and it'll pop right back out through that hole. So what we're going to do now is we're going to feed it through there, hook up the lines to it, and make sure it primes like it's supposed to, and move from there. Yeah, if you need to fix one of these, you know how now. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Appreciate all you guys watching and learning things and sharing your information with me on these videos. I mean, I get a lot of feedback from comments and that. Sometimes I get something wrong and people point it out right away, and I'm glad they do, because you know, I don't know everything. I've been a few years since I've been in the business, but I try and keep active, so I keep in practice, and there's things that I don't know or have forgotten, and I appreciate it when people let me know those things. Put this in the car and return it to the guy when I see him Monday at work. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye for now.